Hello everyone, welcome to Daily News Pulse of 28th May 2026 with respect to the Hindu newspaper, most important news. And the first news that came up over here has been Kerala scientist discovers new evergreen tree species at Shendurne Sanctuary. So what is the news reading? The news first of all reads that scientists from Jawaharlal Nehru Tropical Botanical Garden and Research Institute in Kerala. So that is the first information from you for you. Have discovered a new evergreen tree species. The newly discovered species identified in the riparian forest of Shindurne Wildlife Sanctuary has been officially named as Humboldtia neriana. So this is the information important for us. That is the name of a species. Then after that, the history of discovery has been given. We directly now from here move on to the species is strictly endemic to Kerala and is presently known only from the biodiversity-rich Agasthyamala Biosphere Reserve. So Agasthyamala Biosphere Reserve, Shendurne Wildlife Sanctuary is a part of Agasthyamala Biosphere Reserve itself. Alarmingly, field surveys indicate a fragile wild population. Based on IUCN and Red List criteria, the species has been categorized as data deficient. Since as of now from other areas it has not been found, and still as of now the research is going on. So with respect to this particular news, what are the information that we need to have is first regarding the Shendurne Wildlife Sanctuary. And this is which one is located in Kollam district of Kerala. That's the first thing. Secondly, apart from this, Shendurne Wildlife Sanctuary is well known for its endemic faunal diversity. And there is a very important endemic tree species over here, which is called as Shengurinji. After which the wildlife sanctuary has been named. So Shengurinji again, evergreen tree species which is endemic to this particular region, and the wildlife sanctuary has been named after that. This is one thing. And secondly, now the most dominant vegetation over here is tropical evergreen forest. That's where you have this new species also to be the tropical evergreen tree. Now going beyond that, talking now about the Agasthyamala. So Agasthyamala Biosphere Reserve, when you say this Agasthyamala Biosphere Reserve, now this is where it encompasses basically 4 major protected areas. So Agasthyamala Biosphere Reserve. Now first thing, this is spread over Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And the second, it comprises of 4 protected areas. The protected areas over here, one that is Shendurne Wildlife Sanctuary. This is correct. Second, apart from that, we have is Bepara Wildlife Sanctuary. Third one is Nayyar Wildlife Sanctuary. And the fourth one, which is there, which is Kalakkad Munnanturai Tiger Reserve. These are the 4 protected areas in Agasthyamala Biosphere Reserve. And this Agasthyamala Biosphere is a part of UNESCO's World Network of Biosphere Reserve. As we know, biosphere reserves are identified under UNESCO's Man and Biosphere program. So over here, this biosphere reserve now comprises of the species like Bengal tiger, Asian elephants, Nilgiri tahar is found over here. Along with that, critically endangered loin-tailed macaque is found over here, which is found in Shendurne Wildlife Sanctuary as well. So these are the informations now related to this news, which was the discovery of new evergreen tree species. After this, now moving on to the next news which was covered. So this next news was a editorial piece, basically was about environment, carbon tariffs. So overall in this framework, the first thing that we see, tariffs to carbon, the new rules shaping India's trade. And the editorial has been about carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, about carbon border adjustment mechanism, first of all, it was proposed by EU and has come into force this year only, 2026. The idea is EU has strict emission norms. So any EU manufacturer which is there, now for this EU manufacturer, compliance to these strict emission norms, this will result in higher compliance cost. Now, as the compliance cost is higher for them, their product also would be priced higher in the market. So, what may happen is if we check other countries where the emission norms are relaxed, their compliance cost would be lower. So, their price would be lower in the market. So their price would be competitive in the international market. And so any product entering into EU from outside, from the countries with lower compliance cost, they would become more competitive with respect to the product manufactured in EU. So that's where, say, for example, you take EU and you take X country, the manufacturing cost, if I say, if for both of them manufacturing cost is 100 rupees or 100 euros, whatever, and then compliance cost for EU manufacturer is 20, whereas for this is 5. So the price in the market or the total cost for a EU manufacturer would be 120, whereas for the other countries manufacturer would be 105 only. So other countries manufacturers would be able to sell their produce at a lower price, which becomes highly competitive in the market. Hence, the EU manufacturer would be at loss. So now what EU is saying is, if that is the case, when your product enters the EU market, you have to pay what has been called as the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So when it enters EU market, there you will have to pay 15, which will bring you at parity with the European manufacturer. This is the idea of carbon border adjustment mechanism. So now in this case, when we see the impacts and all what has been discussed in this particular editorial, carbon intensive products such as steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, hydrogen will be affected due to this. So challenges for developing countries such as India. What are the challenges? So challenges when we see sectors to be impacted, first of all, steel and aluminium sectors are likely to face the most immediate impact because they have huge market in Europe. Along with that, given the emission norms in India, our steel or aluminium production is carbon intensive. As such, it becomes very obvious that Indian producers or manufacturers will have to pay higher tax when their product enters the European market. So that is one big challenge. Now, overall, the increasing cost of uh, exports that would be there. So for Indians, when we see first is increased export costs. Secondly, apart from that, the effects of CBM are not confined to direct trade impacts. As a major net importer of fertilizers, now if you see fertilizer production, again, from where India and from where EU imports its fertilizers, now you see Egypt, Russia, Morocco, China, they are major suppliers of fertilizer to EU. But at the same time, they only are major suppliers of fertilizers to India. So now what will happen? Their production is carbon intensive production. And now what is going to happen is their compliance cost will increase because they have to export it to EU. To absorb that increased cost, the overall cost of fertilizers in the market is going to increase. So if you see, as these suppliers face higher carbon compliance cost, part of the burden is likely to be passed on through higher global fertilizer prices. As a result, India's fertilizer import bill is going to increase. So for overall, when India is dependent on import of the fertilizers prices are likely to be increased because of the higher compliance costs, and that is going to impact India straightforward. That's another aspect. So this would become a indirect cost. So increased fertilizer import cost. That's the second aspect. Increased export cost we will mention clearly, steel and aluminium. Then after that, we move on to the CBM framework. So CBM framework, basically we are talking about traditional non-tariff measures. Now, tariff and non-tariff measures, these are considered to be barriers to international trade. Tariff barriers are straightforward, the duties that can be import duties and all that can be imposed on the products. These are tariff barriers. You directly impose tariffs. But the barriers to trade can include non-tariff barriers also, which can be like sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Okay, then related to the product standards which are there. That is where the non-tariff measures work. But now if you see CBM is price-based, correct? Quantifiable. And as such, it is directly linked to market access for carbon intensive products. So non-tariff measures are affecting market access through what? Compliance requirement. Whereas CBM based on the pricing, that would be the direct impact. So what is going to happen in this change scenario, even if exporters comply with the product quality standards, which is the non-tariff measure, the carbon intensity of production is likely to raise export costs and thereby constrains market access. Correct, got it? One is quality, one is the compliance costs with environmental compliance costs. So access you can get, okay, possibly, let's say, for example, access we can get through bilateral treaties, through free trade agreement, which may deal with the tariff barriers. Along with that, in those negotiations, you can deal with the non-tariff barriers also, but the environment compliance cost will still be there. And therefore, additionally, investing in cleaner energy and transitioning towards carbon neutral production is significantly more expensive. So in this context, countries such as India must adopt two-pronged strategies of domestic reform and international negotiations. Now, what are these? The first one that I see over here, what India can do domestically. So domestically, investment in clean energy and strict implementation of carbon policies. Anyways, now India has its own carbon market that India has developed, and there would be the compliances that would be imposed in India also. So eventually, in a longer run, we are expecting that Indian companies, when they have to comply with the emission standards for India, they would automatically get prepared for exports as well under these type of CBM regimes, carbon tax regimes. That is one thing. Secondly, after that, internationally, when we say internationally, India must negotiate for equitable treatment of developing countries. Now, not equal, again, equitable. That EU, if it is imposing is very strictly the CBM on developed countries, it is understandable. But imposing it on developing countries, okay, may not be equitable because developing countries, first of all, do not have resources. And secondly, transitioning completely to clean technologies will require time and will require finance. So that is where some concessions need to be there for developing countries. And this has been the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities. So developing countries should get some concession over here. And that is what the article is saying, that India must negotiate for equitable treatment of developing countries. Correct? So since climate policies such as CBM also raise the cost of importing emission intensive and more expensive goods such as fertilizers, what can be done? Reducing import. Third solution, reducing import dependence through higher domestic production, plus better implementation of soil health card scheme and proper application of fertilizer. So this third solution is specific to fertilizer, okay, which was discussed earlier in the article. So most importantly, when we were talking about the common but differentiated responsibilities and the compliance costs for developing countries, what India should do is transitional support it should seek, as well as technology transfer should be discussed in the different trade agreements. That is when the transitional support, be it the financial support required for the transition, or in effect, the technology transfer related to this transition, that should be brought into the trade agreement discussions. So that's where the idea is. The challenge is not merely adopting carbon constraint trade regimes. Okay, ultimately, at the end of the day, it needs to be done, but ensuring that transition does not undermine growth and sustainability. And that would be overall about complying, or about dealing with the climate change, along with taking care of the economic development as well as sustainability. Correct. So over here, with respect to this, the takeaways, if we see, is the CBAM framework when we are talking about, then this will have to understand the difference between the non-tariff measures or non-tariff barriers versus the CBAM. That's one thing. Then along with that, what India can do, which would be the solution part. Solution part may domestic and international. Domestic needs investment. Investment in what? Investment in clean technologies, eventually developing over the period of time. And with respect to fertilizers, basically, okay, becoming more self-sufficient, which means domestic production has to be enhanced, as well as now talking about maintaining the soil health, so that lesser amount of fertilizers are required, which in any ways in longer run is a requirement. Internationally, we are talking about, okay, equitable treatment. And with respect to equitable treatment, okay, there can be some form of concessions which India can negotiate. And along with that, dealing majorly with tech transfer and transition support. So this should become the overall takeaway from this editorial, which was about the mechanism, which is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and India's response to that. What would be the impacts on India and how India can respond to the challenges posed by these new tariff regimes related to environment. So these were two most important news which were covered in today's The Hindu newspaper. Thank you very much, everyone.